I hope you had an opportunity to listen to Pastor Christian's devotional on Psalm 5 yesterday. He did such an excellent job handling a psalm with such a range of emotion, moving from the heights of joy that are found in those who love the Lord and have been blessed by Him, to the sobering realities of a holy judgment that will be leveled upon those who live in iniquity and speak falsehood. This is certainly part of the difficulty when ever reading the Psalms, as it appears at times that we're dealing with a schizophrenic person. The mood swings are so very real. The sadness and despair can be gripping, and then be immediately followed with hope and joy and gladness, and then also vice versa. We move from mountaintops to valleys, and we move from valleys to mountaintops. This can be part of the thing that can make teaching through the Psalms a difficult task as well, because each psalm deals with such a wide range of themes and topics and emotions. But then perhaps that's also why the Psalms are so beloved. For we realize that we are the very ones that can experience that sort of wide range of emotions, sometimes within very short periods of time. We can be brought from pure elation to utter despair. We can see the saddest moments of our life transformed into something beautiful. Bad days do exist, and hard things do happen. Evil is wreaking havoc on this fallen world, and our hearts in those moments can melt and quake. And yet the Lord brings beauty from the ashes. Though the night may be dark, there is hope in the morning. And Psalm 6 is a glimpse into some of this reality. Here we have a song written by David, which was meant to be accompanied, we're told in the title, by stringed instruments and an 8-stringed lyre, and sung by a choir. The reason I know sung by a choir is the direction was given to the choir director. Why else address this to the choir director if it's not meant for a group of people to be singing it together? And while we don't have the music written out, so we don't know the melody of this song, as is the case with all the Psalms, right? I can tell you for certain that the melody of this psalm was not some bright and cheery tune. This psalm is sung from the depths of woe. We might entitle this psalm a psalm of tears. We read this in Psalm 6, verse 1. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger, nor chasten me in your wrath. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am pining away. Heal me, O Lord, for my bones are dismayed, and my soul is greatly dismayed. But you, O Lord, how long? Return, O Lord, rescue my soul. Save me because of your loving kindness. For there is no mention of you in death, and Sheol, who will give you thanks? I am weary with my sighing. Every night I make my bed swim. I dissolve my couch with my tears. My eye has wasted away with grief. It has become old. It has become old because of all my adversaries. Depart from me, all you who do iniquity, for the Lord has heard the voice of my weeping. The Lord has heard my supplication. The Lord receives my prayer. All my enemies will be ashamed and greatly dismayed. They shall turn back when they will suddenly be ashamed. If there was a category of song that may not frequent our normal repertoire as often in the singing of the church today, it may be the category of lament. Perhaps this is because we have a hard time expressing how we're really feeling in public, especially when it comes to sadness. Perhaps we've gotten into this mode of thinking that joy in the Lord means never expressing any amount of sorrow or sadness. Maybe we become so used to putting on a face because that's what everyone else does, that we've actually lost the ability to be real about how we're feeling. And sadly, our facade is not only not shown to others, but we attempt to then take that same air about us into even relationship with the Lord, where we're not even being real with God about how we're feeling inwardly. But the only thing that really results from these efforts is an avoidance of the real issues that need to be worked through, no matter how difficult, and real tears that often need to be shed in order to get to real healing. Notice the example that David gives us here in Psalm 6. He not only allows himself to express his sorrow, but here is a psalm encouraging people to sing. He's encouraging others. He's singing about his sorrows. He's even putting it to song. You get verse 6. I am weary with my sighing. Every night I make my bed swim. I dissolve my couch with my tears. My eye has wasted away with grief. It has become old because of all my adversaries. He says here in verse 3, my soul is greatly dismayed, but you, O Lord, how long? There are moments in which we may tear up and lightly dab our eyes or nonchalantly wipe our finger underneath our eyelid so as to not draw too much attention to ourselves when one of those maybe starts to develop. But then there is also that kind of experience that is happening to David here. A full-out cry. One of those messy, blubbering, weeping cries. One that, if you engage in it, you have no hope of covering up. Have you ever experienced crying to the extent that David does here? Where you've become even tired of crying, you've become exhausted in your tears, in the depths of your woe? Has your pillowcase ever need to be exchanged for a new one because it's become so wet with the tears from your eyes? Have you ever felt as if your eyes were just going to waste away from grief? That's what David is experiencing. And note that he's calling us to sing this together, to sing of these tears even. I think it's important that we as a church and as the people of God, that we know that we are not alone in sorrows. We all are weak and frail and subject to fears and anxieties and worries. There are times in which we have all cried ourselves to sleep. And attempting to cover this up and to pretend like as if we're invincible doesn't help us, nor does it help anyone else. In fact, not being real about our struggles means we don't receive the strength and encouragement and help that can come to us if we just be real about those things with the Lord and real about these things with others. Perhaps this is among the reasons why this psalm was to be sung by the choir and accompanied by stringed instruments. There can sometimes be, strangely, a sort of healing that happens when we express our sorrows, even putting them to song. Remember, the God who made us is the one who made tear ducts, gave us the ability to express these emotions, and even then sing about them. Bottling up sorrows seldom helps us, but expressing them to God and to loved ones can bring healing and new perspective. Spurgeon put it so well. He said, weeping is the eloquence of sorrow. It is an unstammering orator, needing no interpreter, but understood of all. Is it not sweet to believe that our tears are understood even when words fail? Let us learn to think of tears as liquid prayers, and of weeping as a constant dropping of importunate intercession, which will wear its way right surely into the very heart of mercy, despite the stony difficulties which obstruct the way. My God, I will weep when I cannot plead, for thou hearest the voice of my weeping. Spurgeon there eloquently is expressing that sometimes we don't have the words to say, but isn't it amazing that God gave us the ability to weep, and that even our weeping, our cries, our tears before the Lord are interpreted by Him. Sometimes when words escape us and there's groanings which the Holy Spirit intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words, we're thankful that communication still happens even in the midst of tears. Now notice from the beginning of this psalm that David does not reject the Lord's correction or rebuke. In fact, he admits that he might be in need of it, but he does ask that the Lord not rebuke him in his anger, not in his wrath, that his chastening would come from a place of love. And he makes this plea in verses 1 and 2 on the basis of God's grace. He knows that some of the Lord's blessing comes to his children in the form of discipline. And so he doesn't want to shirk that away. He knows that for the moment discipline isn't enjoyable, but he knows that it yields a wonderful fruit. So he doesn't ask for no discipline, but just that it arise from the context of love and grace and not from the fury and wrath of God. He had been shaken to his very bones, and he requests that God provide him with healing. In these calls to God, David acknowledges God's ability and will to one day bring these difficulties to an end. And yet he wonders, notice he trusts God here, and yet he wonders, how long? Verse 3, but you, O Lord, how long? Spurgeon comments, this sentence ends abruptly, for words failed, and grief drowned the little comfort which dawned upon him. The psalmist had still, however, some hope, but that hope was only in his God. He therefore cries, O Lord, how long? The coming of Christ into the soul in his priestly robes of grace is the grand hope of the penitent soul. And indeed, in some form or other, Christ's appearance is and ever has been the hope of the saints. We may find ourselves at times wondering similarly in dark days, O Lord, how long? His soul was greatly dismayed and in need of rescue and salvation, and so he pleads to the Lord for help because of your loving kindness, verse 4. Notice that David appeals to God's provision here is not based on David's own goodness or deserving it, but upon the Lord. He pleads for mercy on the basis of God's mercifulness. He asks for grace from God on the basis of God's graciousness. He asks for loving treatment, for pity, on the basis of God's magnanimous and steadfast love. Spurgeon said it well. He does not lay hold on God's left hand for justice, but on God's right hand of mercy. He knew his iniquity too well to think that he merited or could appeal to anything but the grace of God. If we turn to justice, what plea can we urge? But if we turn to mercy, we may still cry, notwithstanding the greatness of our guilt, save me for thy mercy's sake. And by the end of this psalm, in verses 8 through 10, we see that David is able to tell the enemies that were harassing him, depart from me, for the Lord has heard my weeping. He knew that the Lord would indeed hear his pleas, his prayers, his cries for help, and that his enemies would be brought to sudden shame and dismay. Perhaps this psalm is teaching us that sometimes the only way to reach the mountain is to go through the valley. There are some things in this life which cannot be skipped past on our way to glory. So rather than avoid them or pretend that they don't exist, we ought to transparently trudge our way through those difficulties, as hard as they may be, knowing that our great God sympathizes with our weakness and that he is near to the brokenhearted. So, dear friends, cry out to God, weep before him, and when words escape you, know that even your tears are understood by our great, loving, and compassionate God. God bless you.